The Greater Centerville Historians organized in the year 2000. The purpose of the organization is to preserve the history of the Township of Centerville, Cleveland and surrounding area. Gerald O'Neill, Charlie Bauer, Richard Wiegand, and myself, Kathleen Sixel, were the founding members. In 1831, the territory south of Green Bay was sold to the U.S. government by the Native Americans who had title to the land. The consideration was the promise of a reservation in another state. The Township of Centerville was established in 1850. The township had a village called Centerville. The reason for the hamlet's original name of Centerville was, in the days of the Indians, there was a trail along Lake Michigan between Manitowoc and Sheboygan. This heavenly spot was exactly at the halfway mark, so the early white man gave it the name Centerville. In 1849, the village of Centerville was surveyed and laid out in lots and blocks. The village of Centerville was renamed Hika when the Postmaster General informed the village leaders that another Centerville was located in the state. When it became time for Centerville to be renamed, a judge in Manitowoc by the name of Albert Schmidt would take kids hiking. The judge said, "You can't call a town hiking, so why not make it Hika?" Thus, the village of Centerville became Hika. In the early years, Centerville had the vision of becoming a lake port. To encourage ships to dock there, 2 piers were built into Lake Michigan. Many German immigrants arrived by schooners, and the village began to grow. The village had a brick factory, stores, schools, a Lutheran and a Catholic church, mills, saloons, blacksmith shop, and a fire department, and a brewery. When the brewery was built, the settlement began to flourish. But when fire destroyed the brewery, the largest industry, there was no longer a need for the harbor facilities. So ended this chapter of the development of Hika. 2 miles west of Hika, another settlement known as St. Wendel began to grow. It had a Catholic church, a general store with a connected dance hall, and a post office was also located in the complex, a funeral parlor, and at one time a motel. With the clearing of the forest, tilling of the land began. This prompted the exporting of lumber and grains. The farmers of Centerville looked forward to the building of a railway since they had a serious problem transporting their products. In 1873, the Milwaukee, Lakeshore, and Western Railroad was built between the settlements of Hika and St. Wendel and was named Centerville Station. In 1880, Centerville Station was renamed Cleveland after President Grover Cleveland. Cleveland, at that point in time, owes its growth to the fact that the Township of Centerville was a rich farming community, and farmers from miles around would bring products to be shipped by rail or ship. The village of Cleveland had several grocery stores, a furniture store, a funeral parlor, several saloons, Lutheran church, hardware stores, several gas stations, newspaper, photographer studio, several car dealerships, cheese factory, several feed mills, livestock yard, and lumber yards. The biggest business was the Cleveland Co-op, which offered many types of services. With the failing of grain crops, the farmers began dairy farming. With the abundance of milk, another industry began, cheese and butter making. Local cheese factories dotted the countryside. One-room schools were usually built near the cheese factories, so children would have a ride to school when farmers brought their milk. In 1958, Hika, St. Wendel, and Cleveland incorporated into the village of Cleveland. In 1968, the Cleveland Elementary School was built. The Township of Centerville has seen many farming changes, but dairy farming is still the primary vocation. Today, Cleveland is known as the seat of Lakeshore Technical College, which offers an educational alternative to 4-year colleges. An ancient proverb states, When an old person dies, a library burns to the ground. These words were the inspiration for organizing the Greater Centerville Historians. We hope to preserve as many memories as possible.
The Pledge of Allegiance, so I'm asked everyone to stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If you may have a seat. You all know that this past weekend was Veterans Day, and I hope that some of you had a chance to take in some of the Veteran Days ceremonies that were going on, or at least spend a minute or two thinking about a vet that either served or is currently serving. And with that in mind, I'm going to ask Fred Jacoby. He's got a little something here on Armistice Day that he wants to read to the group here tonight. So Fred Jacoby, please.
Hold up.
Microphone.
I'm not used to that.
Name?
Pardon?
Name? Who are you?
Well, I'm Fred Jacoby. I wrote this up a number of years ago when I was still teaching to use with the children in school. And then it's gotten some attention, and so now I get invited to other places to do this. And then Charlie heard it the other day and thought it would be appropriate. It's a sort of a review of the history of Armistice Veterans Day. Veterans Day got its start on November 11th, 1918. That was the day that Germany agreed to an armistice to end World War I. An armistice is an agreement by both sides in a war to lay down their arms or weapons to bring an end to the war. The 1918 armistice, ending World War I, was signed in a railroad car in a forest in France. It was called Armistice Day for 36 years, until it was changed to Veterans Day in 1954. It was changed because by that time World War II had taken place. The Korean conflict had come to an end. The idea was that all veterans should be honored, as well as the World War I veterans. Since that time, the Vietnam War, and more recently the Gulf War, the war in Iraq have taken place, and presently we're involved in the war in Afghanistan, and we honor those veterans as well. So now the day is dedicated to all who served in the United States Armed Forces and to the memory of those Americans who gave their lives for their country. In Washington, D.C., special ceremonies are held at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Many communities in the United States have Veterans Day ceremonies at 11 a.m. with veteran groups and local government officials participating. For many years, after the original armistice in 1918, most school children in the U.S. would observe the event by standing and facing the east in the direction of France, where the 1918 armistice was signed, for 1 minute of silence in respect to those who fought and died. This special day is also observed in Great Britain, France, and Canada. Of special interest is the group of 3 11s involved. The number 11 is used 3 times to record the 1918 armistice. The armistice was signed on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Thank you.
bike broke. No. Okay, now we're gonna do introductions, and I think what we're gonna do is, we're just gonna this side, back all the way down to John, and then we'll bring the microphone back up. No, we'll start in the back on this side, and then come back up this way.
Okay.
So, are you gonna just follow, or?
I'll follow you.
Okay, I'm Charlie Bauer from Newton.
I'm Ken Smazel from Rockville.
Thank you.
Richard Schwartz, Town Mimi.
Thank you.
Frederick, Jacoby, Manitowoc.
Thank you.
Rick Beiersdorf, Town Mimi.
Thank you.
Willard Mathias, Cleveland.
Irene Dine, Cleveland. Alice Mathias, Cleveland.
Marie Pippert, Cleveland.
Thank you. I'll hand it back. Thank you.
Bob Domodowski, St. Asians.
Thank you.
Lisa Elfson, Newton. Marie Rosenbauer, Newton.
Thank you.
John Wiegand, Centerville.
Thank you, John.
Phil Sickman, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Hazel Wagner, Cleveland.
Good.
Gertie Free, Cleveland.
Thank you.
John Scott, Milwaukee.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Kirsten Husband, Cleveland.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Kathy Sixel Newton. And I think it's wonderful that John came as a brother to Kirsten. And he came from Milwaukee. So thank you very much, John Scott, for coming. It was quite a distance.
Well, we've heard of you in Milwaukee.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to the Greater Centerville Historians meeting. It is November the 12th. And of course, I want to thank all the veterans for all the wonderful things they did for all Americans and all of us who were safe that never had to serve. Bob and I had watched a series on death. It was on the public TV. And it was in one of the wars that was it the War of 1818 or 1812, Bob? When all these people died in this little village, like 8,000 people, and they had not had any means to bury them. I mean, we don't even think about that, right? That there would have been such a thing like that. So, well, anyways, this evening, our speaker is going to be Kirsten Husband. She has spoken once before, and she did a wonderful presentation, and she's going to be talking about the old Schneider boys' farm. So
last time I spoke, I perched on a chair here, and then I bumped into the phone, and it fell on the floor, so I'm standing this time, so I won't do that again. About a year or so, maybe longer ago than that, Kathy asked, because I'm willing, I'm game, if I would give a talk on the Schneider farm. I'm not related to the Schneiders, but our family lives on their property. So I sort of adopted the family. And I thought doing a talk on the Schneiders would be really easy, and I found out, oh no, it's really, really hard, because it's a huge family. Everybody has the same name, and it's very, very complicated and complex. So I don't think I've made a mistake in my presentation, but if you see a glaring error, please tell me so we can correct it. Unfortunately, there is not one single photograph of the Schneiders. So I have to keep you entertained in other respects. If you have any questions or something, or comments or corrections, please say so. So this is a picture of the farm. As you know, the house did burn down. That's not going to be part of my talk unless Kathy invites me back next year when we talk about when our family took over the farm. So this talk will be entirely up till the time that we bought the farm, starting in 1948. But this is what it looked like. It was a beautiful big house. The summer kitchen is still standing. Big farm, a prosperous farm. Large barn, silo, lots of sheds. The first research I did was I found out that everybody's related to the Schneiders. If you live in Cleveland, you're related. And Carol Salm was somebody who I've never met, but she had a lot of information. And apparently they've done a lot of research, and somebody way back translated this little article. To the well-known names in town of Centerville belongs without doubt the Schneider family. As prominent as the name is today, it has been for generations. This family traces its ancestry back to Michael Schneider. He was a farmer in, that word they couldn't translate. His wife died, leaving him to raise 7 children. As they gradually grew up, they became restless and looked into the distance. Their homeland didn't seem to offer the future they desired, and their glance turned to America. So it happened that in the year 1841, 2 almost grown sons, Peter Schneider and Joseph Schneider, as the forerunners of the family, emigrated to America. In Jefferson County in the state of New York, they found friends and decided to stay in the settlement. In the next year, the father sold his property, that would be Michael, and followed with the other 5 children, John, Leonard, Christian, Dominic, and Elizabeth. They followed those who had gone ahead. The father bought land in the state of New York on the site selected by them, a farm. Like all successful families, the siblings stuck together and worked with diligence and caution their farm and the community prosperity. Here they lived for 6 years. In the meantime, they had glowing reports which then newspapers shared about Wisconsin and attracted their attention. And if you'll remember when I talked about the Wimlers, they also came a little bit later in the 1850s, and they also had those glowing reports, even in Germany, to come to Wisconsin. The final decision to move to Wisconsin was followed by the actual moving, and again 2 sons, this time Joseph and Dominic as forerunners, went ahead. They traveled from Oswego along the Great Lakes to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Here they were advised to move to Sheboygan. They followed the advice. In Sheboygan, they met with a land agent in negotiations, and this trail took them into the wilderness to the spot which today is Centerville. Hard to think we're a wilderness. Based on a land contract, they obtained a piece of land, built a blockhouse on it, and began with the clearing. In the fall of that year, the rest of the family followed and established their new home. They were genuine pioneers, willing to work, and were equipped with a proper understanding. The result was that all prospered. The sons married one by one and founded in the vicinity their own home. Only the daughter Elizabeth moved further away. She married a Mr. John Schulte and followed him to Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. She's the only one of the children that I have not been able to track with any accuracy. That's the hard thing with women, because when we get married, we change our last name, and that makes it very hard. And the first genealogy work that I've ever worked on was through my father's side, which was Norwegian, and it's so easy because women didn't change their last name. So you can follow them from birth to death so simply. In the course of the years, the son became well-to-do farmers, fathers of families, and well-founded, well-established citizens. Their descendants and living in this and neighboring villages all scattered about. Not all of them carry the name Schneider, since the daughters took the name of their husbands, but still they are of the same ancestry. Probably the most well-known of the brothers was Dominic. He was the man who with reading acquired an education in healthy judging and reasoning acuity. Skilled with a pen and his strong English language, he could draw up legal documents, some of which are still available. As the family spread out, would best be shown with a simple count. And so here's where I thought this was going to be easy until I read this. Michael Schneider immigrated here with 7 children. They had 20 descendants, and these had 87. We won't do 87 tonight. They can all with pride refer back to their ancestors, because each laid the foundation to a comfortable prosperity and left a respected and looked up to name. The Schneider family name is perhaps one of the most widely known and best known names in the town of Centerville. All of these families date their family name back to a Michael Schneider of Germany. Michael Schneider's home was in the very heart of southern Germany, in the vicinity of the famous castle of the Hohenzollern in Baden-Württemberg, Germany. His wife had died very suddenly, leaving behind her saddened husband and 7 children. When the children had grown up, they became restless and sought to establish their homes and future farther away. Their homeland did not seem to offer them a satisfactory life and future. Their thoughts and hopes turned to distant America, where so many other citizens had already discovered and found a new home. In the year 1841, two of the sons, Peter and Joseph, who had grown up in the meantime and decided to stay in that vicinity, which is in New York, in the following year. The father also sold his property in Germany and decided to follow the two older sons with the 5 other children, Johann, Christian, Leonard, Dominic, and Elizabeth, to a new homeland in the state of New York. I have been told near Rochester, New York, in Jefferson County, in the neighborhood of his 2 older sons. His sons living there aided him in finding a suitable location and home. A lot of that is wrong. When I do research, I try very hard to find the records so that we can establish what is correct, what is anecdotal, and what's wishful thinking. This is the actual passenger list from Columbia. So it was Joseph and Peter Schneider, the 2 sons, who embarked in Bremen and arrived. They landed in Baltimore on June 3rd, 1842, along with 131 other immigrants. And they're both listed as farmers from Hackingen. So the first 2 of the Schneider family came in 1842. By some miracle, the only Schneider I have a picture of is Peter Schneider. So he was one of the first to come. And you'll notice that doesn't work. That very strong jaw. You're going to see that again in female form.
What does it say on the bottom?
I found an ancestor. His name is Ray Summers, and this is his picture. So it says Ray's great-grandparents, Therese Retley, and Peter Schneider. Okay, why isn't my thing going? I can do it that way, but it was working.
Go right ahead, please.
This is the passenger list from the ship Rebecca. Michael Schneider and the remainder of his children embarked in Antwerp, arrived in New York on May 23rd, 1843. Their destination was listed as Pennsylvania, but they actually ended up in New York. And they sailed along with the Costanzer family. This is very hard to read. This is the kind of stuff I deal with all the time. But, and I can pass this around, I have a copy of it. The Schneiders are here, and the Costanzers are here. They all come from the same place. I have no idea if they knew each other before they left Germany, or whether they met on the ship, but that's important. Do you want to pass these for people? Oops, I'm sorry, in here. Michael Schneider and his sons arrive in Centerville Township. On October 8, 1848, William O.F. Hoffman of Sheboygan sells Michael Schneider 400 acres of land for $650. On July 29, 1850, Michael sells 80 acres to his son Leonard for $200. I have a brand new respect for our friend Bob, who does land record research. I spent days, hours in the courthouse going through records, going crazy, looking out the window across the street at the courthouse pub, thinking that's really where I should spend my time. It is very, very hard to do. And I did get a lot of the records, but not 100% because I kind of gave up. So I have a new respect for you, Bob, more than ever before. The 1850 census is a federal census. It was done every 10 years. And the 1850 census is the first one that actually lists individuals by their name. So taken August 15th, 1850 in Centerville. And on this one, Centerville is spelled E-R. But it's going to be Centerville R-E up to 1920. We have Michael Schneider. That's another thing that you find when you do research is that names and spellings are very fluid and you just kind of go with the story here. So he's Michael Schneider. His sons John, Christian, Leonard. F. Schneider is actually Dominic. Mary, Joseph, Lucinda, Charlotte. I have absolutely no idea who Charlotte is. I cannot find her. I don't know who she is. And Elizabeth. So Dominic married and had 2 children living in New York. They're all coming here to Centerville, living with Michael, all on the same farm, the Schneider farm. The reason it's important to know that the Costanza family sailed along with the Schneiders on that ship is that 2 of the sons married Costanza girls. Dominic did. Dominic married Mary. But in 1850, when they were already in Centerville, this is now called the Costan or Constance family, Magdalene is still living there with her family. But I don't know if she fell so madly in love that she wanted to come here. But she came and she married her brother-in-law. So on June 21st, 1852, Leonard Schneider married Magdalena Costanza. They were married by a Catholic priest. He was about 43, she was about 32. One of the things I did find, which I thought was very interesting, is that many of the Schneiders were on the older side when they married. I thought everybody got married when they were young, but back then, but they didn't. They were all really quite a bit older. So both of them married sisters. But she didn't come, they didn't get married when they were all together in New York. She waited 2 years before she came. The state does a census halfway between the federal census. In the 1855 census in Centerville, we have Leonard Schneider. There are 2 males and 2 females. 2 are of foreign birth. So that would be Leonard and Magdalene. 2 children, I'm assuming, because the other 2 were American born. But I don't know where Michael is. He's not listed. Because I know he's still here, because in 1860, there he is living with them. So he's the father, son, now he's Schneider. Magdalene, the children, Frederick, Mary, and Francis. We also know from the St. Wendel church records that they had 2 children, 2 other children, Albertina Maria, born in 1862, and Elizabetha, born in 1863. Michael Schneider, according to the St. Wendel church records, died November 27th, 1869 at the age of 86. There's no gravestone in the cemetery. And before I came tonight, my husband looked at this, because I didn't want him to come here. So he looked at it at home, and he said, I wonder if that was the cemetery across from our house meaning the Schneider house. And what made us think that was back in the 1970s, I was outside, and an older man came walking down the road. It was a gravel road back then, very distinguished, gray hair, and he had been a sailor on the Great Lakes. And I never got his name, but he was taking a walk, visiting some of the places around here. And across from the Schneider house, and still on Centerville Road, but on the east side of the road, are 2 huge, beautiful pine trees. And he said that once there was a little iron fence around it, and stones, and he always thought that was a cemetery, and he wondered if we had ever found anything there. And there are still some stones, but there was never, just like field stones, but there was never any marking. But now maybe I wonder, perhaps Michael was buried there. I don't know. The 1870 census. One of the things that's new in this is that they ask whether parents are of foreign birth or not. So that always helps a lot with research when you're researching people too. In 1870, we have Leonard, now he's Schneider, his wife, Frederick, Catherine, Mary, I don't know, they changed names, Beryline, who's actually Albertina, and Elizabeth. Frances, who was listed as 2 years old in the last census, isn't there anymore, and she must have died, but I don't have any death records for her. What's interesting is his property was valued at about $5,000. And I always knew this was a prosperous farm. People always told us that when we bought it, the Schneiders was really a wealthy, prosperous farm. So what I did was I thought, well, here I know the value of their farm. So I went through the entire census of Centerville Township, listing the value of the different farms. And so these were the most prosperous. The most prosperous was Theodore Schulte, and that's where Kenny Colchin lives now. That's that farm. But you can see some of the names, which I'm sure you'll recognize, and the value of their land in 1870. Christian Hetzel, that's where we are right now. This was the Hetzel farm. Is that a Jacoby of yours, Paul?
In town Wilson, and then eventually moved up here. About 1860, so.
So, the 1872 plat map is a little bit hard to see, but here is North Avenue. Here's the Schneider farm. This is Theodore Schulte, this whole thing. You can see it's a really big farm. This is North Avenue going down to Franklin Drive. That's Centerville Road.
You know who has some of those farms today, or have they been lotted out, or?
No, but you people probably do. You know, well, we're going to see some plat maps farther down the road. I'm sure you know this is where you people all come from. I'm just an import.
Could you point out the Schneider farm
Yes.
buildings on that map one more time?
Okay, sure. This is Franklin Drive, North Avenue, Centerville Road, and this is the Leonard Schneider farm right here.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the house.
Okay.
It's a little clearer in 1878. Mrs. Schulte has sold a whole bunch of her land, but you can still see Leonard Schneider here. These are little plots. Mills, there's Schneiders all up here, but this is where I'm focusing on, just this Schneider. Then I thought what I would do is just follow the people who actually lived on that farm. I didn't take all of their descendants, but all the people who lived on that farm. So Maria Catherine Schneider married Nicholas Ort. They were married in 1875 and had 2 children, Anna and John. And I have them in the 1880 census. And she was Leonard's sister. No, Leonard's daughter. Leonard's daughter. The 1880 census, this is nice. If somebody lives in the city, they will give you their address. Actually the street and number, so that you can look up people, which is very handy sometimes. Another thing too is if you were unemployed, it asks you that, and for how long you were unemployed, whether you were sick or temporarily disabled, and the nature of the illness. So often you can get a lot of good information on the 1880 census. In 1880, we have Leonard Schneider, Magdalena, Albertina, now she's got her name right, Elizabeth and Frederick. A year later, the farm is going to change hands. But first, Albertina gets married, and she marries Michael Pfeiffer. They were married in 1880. They had 5 children, Emma, John, I wrote it as it was spelled, Niklaus, Shatrim, I copied it as it was, and Wilma. And now, father to son, in 1881, Leonard sells the 120-acre farm to Frederick for $5,800, and 2 days later, Leonard gets married. Through the 1880s and 1890s, lots of things happened. May 31st, 1881, Frederick Schneider married Emma Pfeiffer, daughter of John and Elizabeth. They had 7 children, all of whom survived to adulthood. We have John, Maria, Albertina, Anton, John Wilhelm, Elizabeth, and Joseph. And so this is the family raised on our farm. Elizabeth Schneider marries Nicholas Salm. In 1885, they had 8 children, 5 living. The 1900 census is really one of the best ones for researchers. It tells you so much information, and one of the most important is it gives you the relationship. Is this their daughter, their son-in-law? Who are they? It also tells you how many children a woman has had, and how many are still living, which really helps a lot too. It gives you the year of immigration to the United States, which you have to take with a grain of salt, let me tell you. How many years you've been in the United States, and they make those match even though one of them might be totally wrong. And whether you're a naturalized citizen. Only men were naturalized at this time. Leonard Schneider died in 1897, and there was a publication called Der Nordwesten, and in 1897, Death Saturday in Cleveland of 88-year-old Leonard Schneider of old age. He was born July 1809. He's survived by his widow, a son, now he's Frederick, who owns the homestead, and 3 married daughters, Mrs. Nicholas Ort, Mrs. Michael Pfeiffer, and Mrs. Nicholas Salm, who all reside in the neighborhood of Cleveland. The well-attended funeral took place at the Catholic Cemetery in St. Wendel. And here is Leonard's grave at the St. Wendel Cemetery. The 1890 census, unfortunately, was lost. It doesn't exist. And that's a huge gap. That's a generation between 1880 and 1900. So that makes it very hard. And they really don't know. Here it says some said it was a cigarette, some said it was a conspiracy. But no one really knows for sure what started the fire on January 10th, 1921, that destroyed a large portion of the 1890 U.S. federal census. But it's lost. And a lot of it was lost perhaps in the fire, and even more was lost as they tried to put out the fire. So there is no 1890 census. However, I did find some interesting documents, and there's an 1890 property value tax record for Fred Schneider. He lives in School District 5. He had 2 horses valued at $100, 13 cows valued at $134, 2 sheep, 4 pigs, 2 wagons, and $76 for something else. 13 cows was really pretty many. It really was. Some of his neighbors had far fewer cows than that. School District 5 would have been the Red Arrow School. And according to one thing I found, in 1858 there were 33 pupils. In 1874, 106 pupils. I don't suppose they all went to school, but they were perhaps registered. And by the 1940s, enrollment was about 30 students. So in 1970s, our little Albertina and her sister would have walked to school, down to the Red Arrow School, because according to the census, they both were students. 1900, so this is one of the best for research, the 1900 census for Centerville. Now we're Frederick Schneider. Emma And we know that Emma had 7 children, and all 7 are still living as of that date, June 15th, 1900. We have John, Mary, Dinah. That's Albertina. Anton, William, Lizzie, and Joseph. And Magdalena is still alive. She's 79. She's a widow. She's a capitalist. And she is living with them. And she had 6 children, 4 of whom are still living. (1905) state census taken June 1st. We have now he's Fred Schneider. Emma, Johnny, Mary, and Albertina both work as servants. I don't know where. Maybe they helped on other farms, or perhaps down in the little village of Hika somebody needed help. I really don't know. Anton, Willie, Lizzie, Joseph. Magdalena is not there, but she should be, because she didn't die until 1909. And she died at the age of 89 of a malignant ulcer on her head. And it tells you here, resident of town Centerville since 1853. So when you do research, it doesn't all fall very neatly. You have to take all these little clues to put your picture together. And here is her grave at St. Wendell's. The 1910 census. This one asks how many years you've been married, which is sometimes very important to know. And again, how many children you have, how many you are still living. It asks you about your profession, and then to be a little bit more specific about your profession, and then whether you're an employer or an employee, and sometimes that's important too. In 1910, we have Fred Schneider, his wife Emma, who was Emma Pfeiffer, John, Mary, Albertina, Anthony, William, Elizabeth, and Joseph. John Schneider is the first to get married. He married Anna Hildebrand on April 10th, either in 1914 or 1912. I have 2 different accounts. She grew up in the town of Sheboygan. Her father was also a farmer, and as far as I can tell, they did not have any children. John had a farm and did retire from farming and then moved to town. I can't tell, so Bob someday will have to do all these houses, either Hika or St. Wendell, but he did give up farming and eventually moved into town. World War I comes along, and that's very appropriate now for Veterans Day. There are, the men had to register, and I have the blank forms. These are very, very difficult to read, but there were the 4 boys, the 4 Schneider boys. 2 of them got exemptions from the draft. William, who was 27, his exemption was that he was working his father's farm. So he got an exemption for that. The other one who got an exemption was Anton, who was 28. And the reason for his exemption was that he had a deformity. And I don't know what it was. He obviously was able to work on the farm. I don't know if anybody knows what it might have been. It doesn't list what it was. But that was the reason he was exempt from the World War I draft. What's also kind of fun about these is it tells you a little bit about what they looked like. So Anton was tall. He had a medium build. He had a dark complexion. He wasn't bald, and he had brown eyes. The other 2 sons also registered. This was done in September of 1918. They're both listed as farmers. This is John's. He was also tall, of a medium build. And Joseph. He was medium. He wasn't as tall as his brothers, apparently. And he had light brown hair and light brown eyes. So you get just a little picture of what these people were like. But it tells you that what their occupation was. It tells you their date of birth. So again, you get lots of information from this World War I draft registration. The next person to get married is William Schneider, and he had an article. He had a pretty wedding. I think that's a typo, unless it was really a shindig, I don't know, at St. Wendel Church. A very pretty wedding was solemnized at St. Wendel Church when Miss Magdalena Schneider became the bride of William Schneider. So, oh boy, now we get, how many Schneiders can we get here? The couple were attended by Miss Loretta Nickish as maid of honor and Arno Schneider, a brother of the bride. Whew. So when I found she had a brother named Arno, I could track down which Schneider is this, how are they related? And Miss Clara Schneider is bridesmaid. And then it goes on. The bride has been employed at the Prangy store in Sheboygan in the past year. So that's an interesting thing. So how are they related? Because they're sure going to be related, right? Magdalena was the daughter of Frank and Wilhelmina. Frank was the son of Joseph. Joseph was the son of Michael. Magdalena and William share the same great-grandfather. So that's how they're related. This is a picture I found of Frank and Wilhelmina Schneider and the names of the children, but I don't know who's who. So one of those women is Magdalena, who married William Schneider. Does anybody know? The 1920 census. The 1920 census for Centerville taken January 10th. We have Fred Schneider, Emma, Mary, Albertine, Antone, and Joseph, because the others are gone and married. Mary Schneider gets married. She marries George Bowman, who is the son of Mr. and Mrs. Louis Bowman, town of Mosel. And her sister Lizzie and brother Joe were her attendants. And the bride wore a gown of white satin with all over drape of Spanish lace and carried a bouquet of roses and swansonia. Miss Schneider wore a crown of old rose canton crepe and carried an arm bouquet of chrysanthemums. I just love when they tell you that sort of thing. And when they were married, then they went to live with his parents. The last daughter to be married was Elizabeth. And Elizabeth didn't rate a pretty thing in the newspaper, but I did happen to find someone who's related to her, and so I have some pictures of her. So Elizabeth Schneider married Frank Chukowski. That was spelled about a million different ways. And they lived in Sheboygan. The one interesting thing about Frank is he's the only one of all the men that I'm talking about tonight who actually went and served overseas in any of the military conflicts, and he served in World War I. And there are many, many newspaper articles about him after later on, you know, being in the VFW and parades and that sort of thing. So he was very patriotic and very proud of his military service. But anyway, so here she is. And as I said, do you remember the nice strong chin? Like Peter Schneider. So there's no mistaking she's a Schneider. But those are great pictures. In 1929, Fred Schneider writes his will. He was 76, and he leaves to Emma $15,000, to his daughter Mary $2,000, to his other daughter Elizabeth $2,000, and to Albertina, who never married, $3,000. No provisions for John and William were provided for during my lifetime. All the remainder of the estate to Antone and Joseph, share and share alike. So this is September 1929. December 1930, Mary Schneider Ort dies, and she had a lingering illness, had a big funeral. She was born in town Centerville, May 1854. She attended school there, survived by her husband, one daughter, one son, and then on and on. Albertina Schneider Pfeiffer's death in October 1931. That was, she lived in the town of Mosel. Lovely floral tributes and the many persons who attended the funeral indicated in a measure the high esteem in which Mrs. Pfeiffer was held. Pallbearers are listed, out-of-town people are listed, so this is a good way to get to know family members and people who might be connected with the family. When I pass out these, I've enlarged these, but on the back I always print the newspaper page, because I think it always has a lot of fun things, ads. They're pretty microscopic. Oh, I do have a magnifying glass. But it's fun to see the ads, it's fun to see other things that were actually happening in the world when that incident occurred. And here is her grave at St. Wendel's. In the 1930 census, we still have Frederick and Emma, and 3 of their children at home, Anton, Albertina, and Joseph. And one of the highlights of the 1930 census is, did you know? And they did. And as a matter of fact, I have a newspaper clipping that in 1925, John Schneider got a radio, and it made the newspaper. So it was apparently a pretty important thing to have a radio. But that's one of the questions on the 1930 census. Frederick Schneider dies September 1st, 1934. Funeral services for Frederick Schneider, 81, lifelong resident of the county who died at the home in the town of Centerville Saturday night, were held this morning from St. Wendel Church. Interment was in the church cemetery. He was born in 1853 on the homestead farm, where he resided all his life. In 1881, he married to Emma Pfeiffer. Survivors are his widow and 7 children. They are John and William of Centerville, Anton and Joseph at home, Mrs. George Bowman, Sheboygan, Miss Albertina at home, and Mrs. Frank Chukowski in Sheboygan. A sister, Mrs. Nick Salm Sr. of Centerville, also survives. I found out there were quite a few Nick Salms, too. And there's his grave. Emma Schneider dies not too long afterwards, in 1936. She was 74. She died early today at the farm home in the town of Centerville. She had been seriously ill for a week. She also had her funeral at St. Wendel's. Mrs. Schneider was born in Mosel, Sheboygan County in 1862. She married Frederick Schneider 53 years ago, and they had located on the homestead farm in Centerville. So from their entire married life, they lived on the farm. And here is Emma's grave in St. Wendel's. And there's a whole section here for the Frederick Schneider family. It's a lovely stone. The 1940 census, which just came out this year, which is really nice. You have to wait. And it just came out, so that's got a lot of good information, and it's one of the easiest ones to read. So May 3rd, 1940, the head of the farm is now Joseph, even though he's not the oldest. Anton, Albertina, and now Mary and her husband have come back to the farm. Down the road, William, or actually up the road, north, is William Schneider, his wife Magdalene, and they have 3 children, Raymond, Eugene, and Caroline. And to the best of my knowledge, he's the only one of the Schneiders who had children. In 1942, there was a very tragic accident at the William Schneider farm. Well, no, not at the William Schneider farm, to William Schneider. He was killed in a threshing machine accident, and these are terribly gory. They really went in for all the details. Very sad. The threshing was actually occurring on a different farm, which is now, where was it? It was the Frank Young, I'm assuming Young, J. Young farm, which is where Clarence Bailitt's house was, and that's where the accident occurred. But it was apparently his threshing machine, so perhaps, it was one where they went around and helped each other out. But it's very gruesome account here. And again, I have copies for you to look at, and then what's happening in the rest of the world on the other page. Oops, here's one more. So when he died, he did leave his wife Magdalene and their 3 children to survive him. And here is his grave. He's not buried at St. Wendel's, he's at St. George and St. Johannes. He and Magdalene are buried there. But good things happened too. In 1950, they had a 35th wedding celebration for John and Anna Schneider. And it's kind of fun too to see who all came to this. And they say they were surprised at their home Friday evening when relatives and friends gathered there to help them observe their 35th wedding anniversary. The activities started with a sherry very, which was followed by a mock wedding. Well, I had to look that up. I had heard the word chivalry, and this is the same thing, but I guess you bang on pots and pans and you raise a big ruckus. And anyway, so anyway, but here it's spelled differently. Charivari. So that's what they did. They had a big festival to do for John and Anna. And then back at the William Schneider family up there on Centerville Road, they had a fire, a major fire, which burned a lot of the buildings, destroyed animals, burned a wood pile, and even though there was no shortage of water because the creek was right there, they still couldn't put the fire out. The damage, there's also been a fire about a month earlier, so they had 2 fires. And the fire a month earlier, the damage was estimated at $15,000. In this one, there were 4 buildings, including a good-sized barn, a granary, storage shed, and a tool shed were destroyed by the fire, which broke out at about 4:30 p.m. Cleveland and Newton firemen responded to the call quickly, but the brisk winds of the late afternoon had fanned the fire out of control by the time they arrived at the scene. They also lost machinery, stacks of hay and grain, and at least 6 heifers housed in the barn, along with 2 horses. Next, chronologically, is Elizabeth Schneider-Salms' death in 1952. She was 88. She had a lingering illness and also a funeral at St. Wendel's. And it talks about all the people who came, pallbearers and visitors who came to her funeral. I have a couple other things from some of William Schneider's children and so on, which I'm not really going to talk about, but I'll pass those around too if you're interested in looking at those. And here's where she's married. Anna Hildebrand, the lady who had the big bash in 1950, died at the age of 75. It has her listed as being in Hika. She died at St. Nick's following a lingering illness. Gives you her parents, Jacob and Caroline Hildebrand. And this one says on April 10th, 1912, she was united in marriage. I do have one other reference that says 1914. Following their marriage, they moved to Centerville, where they operated a farm. After retirement, the couple resided in Hika. And here is their grave, John and Anna. Antone, lifelong resident of the town of Centerville, died Wednesday at St. Nick's after a lingering illness. He was the son of Frederick Schneider, lived in town Centerville, where he and a brother operated a farm, and he says he never married. He's survived by 2 brothers, John and Joseph of Hika, and 3 sisters, Mrs. George Bowman, Mrs. Frank Chukowski, and Miss Albertina Schneider. And here is his grave. John Schneider dies in 1958. He was 75. He was a retired farmer, the son of Frederick and Emma Pfeiffer Schneider. He married Miss Anna Hildebrand. This is the one that says 1914. They operated a farm until their retirement, when they moved to Hika. And then after his wife died, he moved to a nursing home, St. Mary's Home in Manitowoc. And again, it talks about the survivors and the funeral. And his grave. Here's the latest plat map that I could find, 1958. So this is really pretty current. This is now, okay, North Avenue, Centerville Road, Franklin Drive. This is the Schneider home. This is now called the Schneider Brothers Farm, and it's 220 acres. Pretty big. Frank Chukowski's death, he's the husband of Elizabeth, and he's the one who served overseas in World War I. He worked most of his life for the Kingsbury Brewery in Sheboygan, and it talks about his survivors and the mass and so on. Albertina Schneider died May 31st, 1965. She was 78. I was able to find her death certificate in Manitowoc. She was 78. There's the cause of her death, and she died at home at 5 p.m. They're almost all dead. Mary Schneider Bowman, she died in 1967. She also died at home, and home means the Schneider farm. Joe Schneider died in 1969. He was 70. He died St. Nick's in Sheboygan. George Bowman died November 13th, 1980. He died in Manitowoc. And Elizabeth Schneider Chukowski, the last leaf on the tree, she died in 1992 at the age of 100. And you would think there'd be a newspaper article about that, and I cannot find a thing. But she and her husband are buried in Sheboygan, and there's her gravestone. So, but I can't find, there surely must have been something, but I can't find it. I can't find an obituary or anything else. So Joseph Schneider died intestate, and his heirs were his sister, Elizabeth Chukowski, and his 2 nephews, Raymond F. Schneider, Eugene Schneider, and his niece, Caroline Scherenbrock, and those were the children of William Schneider. And then in May 1971, the Schneider farm passes to my mother, Bridget Johnson, and we purchased that farm. So this is the, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of bright. Here is a aerial view. Can you see? Or is it too bright? Because I have the farm, the boundaries of the farm marked off, that you can see where the property is today. And that's perfect time to break because I'm not done yet.
Okay, we're gonna take a 5-minute break, and I got one question. She was talking about when they first came and they moved into the wilderness, they built a block house. And I heard that a couple other places while I was doing research, that when they first get into the wilderness, start clearing land, they built a block house. Does anybody know what they're talking about? It didn't say sod, it's a block. I'm just assuming that it's maybe like a 10 by 10, a square building, but I don't know that. Does anybody ever, Fred?
I read a few old.
Your name,
Frederick
please?
Jacoby.
Thank you.
I've read a few old articles about immigrants coming and settling in our area, Manitowoc County and so on. And it seemed to me that the blockhouse was simply what they called it before they came from Germany, right? They referred to it as a blockhouse. When we are settled in our blockhouse, and I'm thinking it was simply a crude log cabin, but I don't know if that's correct.
Go right ahead, please.
I hope maybe you can see it a little bit better. This is a Google satellite map. This is the boundary of the present property that we own. So just to give you a little bit of an orientation here, this is Centerville Road. Okay, this is the Schneider house where all those people lived, every single one of them. And the house where my mother lived that burned down. North Avenue, and then we go up through LS, and then over here, and around here. This is Ben Yost's house, and the woods over here. So right now it's about 150 acres. And on here, the next part of my talk, because I'm not done, it's not only the Schneiders, but there were at least 2 other families that lived on that land. And there are foundations here and here. Okay. But one thing I forgot to hand out, and like I said, that Bob gets a prize. This is what it looks like. These are what land records look like if you've never seen them before. And you see if you can read what this says. So there were at least 2 other families that I'm going to talk about tonight. The 1878 plat map is nice and clear and easy to read. And so here is the Schneider house, and here are some little lots. And you can see where 2 houses are on those little lots. And the most northern ones, the northern one belonged to Rudolf Schmalz, and the southern one to Ludwig Bay. I think it's pronounced Bay. So the 1860 census is the first time we see, now he's Rudolf Schmalz, and his wife Augusta, and they're living with Valentine Paul and his wife Mary, and their children Peter, Louis, and Philippine. The 1860 census, I don't know who took it, but they couldn't write and they used disappearing ink. And it is incredibly difficult to read. You almost can't make anything out. So I'm not sure where this is that they live, but this is the first census that he shows up in. It is in Centerville, but I'm not sure if it's on that property. Rudolph was in the Civil War. He enlisted as a private on October 10th, 1864 at the age of 28, and those records tell us he was 5'7" tall, had blue eyes and dark hair. He mustered out on July 17, 1865 at Nashville, Tennessee. And during that time, he left his wife Augusta at home with at least 2 young children. He was in the 45th Infantry Regiment, Wisconsin. They only fought 1 battle that I could find in Nashville. Total of 1,001 soldiers, 26 died, 8 deserted, 8 transferred, 80 were discharged, and 802 were mustered out. I also found, which it's just somebody was pointing out to me how you recognize all these different names, but the lieutenant colonel in charge, the colonel in charge was Henry F. Balance. And you'll sometimes see the bailiff's names in many documents. Now I was thinking, okay, he went off, well he didn't necessarily go off, but he did go off. But did other young men in town Centerville also enlist? And in one day, 23 other young men just from Centerville also enlisted. So you might recognize there's a Jacoby there. So imagine the population of young men who left all in one fell swoop. And there were others who enlisted earlier too, so there were other men out fighting. But just in one day, all these young men joined up. There was another Jacoby, but he was in town Newton, so I couldn't put him on there, even though I think maybe they were brothers or something. So there were also some Mosul, some Mimi, but I just took town Centerville, who all went on the same day. And Rudolph, he does have a Veterans Memorial on his grave. In the 1870 census, Rudolph Schmalz, 35, living with Augusta and son Paul. He's listed as a carpenter. His land is valued at $800 and his personal property at $1,300. I don't know if he had a shop in Hika. He may have. Bob, there's a job for you. I'm not sure, or perhaps it was at his home, but anyway, he obviously had very valuable property in his workshop. The annual report from the town supervisors, so between April 1872 and April 73, he received $5 for making a coffin, and this money comes from the Poor Fund. It was very interesting to read those records that Kathy has, is that there was always a poor fund, and they would tell you who received the funds from that, and that's sometimes how people helped the poor, but Rudolph made coffins. He got $2 for being a clerk at a special election, and again in 1876 he was paid $6 for making a coffin. $1875 doesn't tell you much, but Rudolph is there with 2 males, 2 females. 1880, now he's Schmalz, his wife Augusta, 3 children, Paul, Rosa, Ida. He's listed now as a farmer, but we know he also had a daughter, Lena, who was born shortly after this, June 18th, 1881. He was naturalized in 1884, and your naturalization records tells you where you were born. Sometimes it tells you where you landed and the year. So this tells us he came in June 1857 through New York. I would probably trust this record more than I would trust some other records. I cannot find his passage, nowhere. 1885, 2 males, 3 females. So probably he and his wife were born in Germany, children born here. His property value in 1890, he also lived in School District 5. He only had 2 horses, 3 cows, 1 pig, and 1 wagon. So I'm thinking maybe he's not the carpenter anymore. He was elected constable in 1880, 81, and 84, and in 1894 he was elected treasurer, and he won. He beat out Louis Barr, 132 votes. In the 1900 census, he's living with his wife Augusta. This tells us they were married for 43 years. They both came in 1857. She had 10 children, 3 still living. So we're going to try to find those kids. There was a transfer of property in 1902. He sold all of his personal property to his wife Augusta for $1. A couple months later, they sell the 25 acres of their farm to Fred Schneider for $1,900. So this is 1902, and he died in 1903. And his grave, whoops, is upside down, oh dear. Sorry about that. It's really not. It's really right side up. He's at the St. George and St. Johannes Cemetery. And his does have the veterans marker. So I'm looking for the children. She had 10, only 3 alive. Let's see if we can find them. St. John's Ebenezer Reformed Church Cemetery is a little teeny tiny cemetery on F. There's no church. It's just east of Westview. And I could not find these stones, but luckily in 1976 it was transcribed. There was Emily, born 1861, died January 1866. Her little sister Pauline died a week later. Can you imagine losing 2 little children a week apart? Son Robert died January 1874. There's also a death record for Ida Schmalz. She was the one who was in the census, but she died 17 days after that. Her death record lists is very hard to read. It was pseudomembranous something or other. Couldn't read the last word, which I looked up. There are places to look for what those things mean in modern language, and it's defined she died of croup. So 3 children, no records, but there are 3 still living, so let's find them. The 1900 census for Manitowoc. We have Gustav Alter, who was a purchasing agent. He lived at 703 Marshall Street with his wife Hattie, son Frederick and Clarence, and Lena Schmalz, 15, was there working for them. So now we're following Lena. Wisconsin marriages. Frank Schweig, born in Two Rivers, married Lena Schmalz, daughter of Rudolph and Augusta Kaufmann Schmalz, on October 28, 1903. Or October 21st, 1903. It depends. In the 1910 census in Milwaukee, we have Frank Schweig, Lena, daughter Esther, and son Elmer, and Augusta Schmalz. So she's living with her daughter Lena now. Frank is a puddler in a steel mill, and I had to look up puddler. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when you melt all the iron ore and then you swirl it around and then you put it into something, well anyway, the puddler does all that with the molten ore. We can tell from this that it was the first marriage for both of them. She had 2 children both living, and there they are, Esther and Elmer. They live at their own home at 1449 Clement. I know where Clement is in Milwaukee. Anyway, there are mistakes with her information. She didn't emigrate in 1870, and she did not have 4 children, 2 living. So this is what researchers encounter all the time, mistakes. In 1920, Frank, he's actually Scheig, but he's not, he's Schweig. Lena, Esther, and Elmer, Augusta is still alive, living with them. Now he's a rougher in a steel mill, and they still live at 449 Clement Avenue. Because remember, you get to a point where they will give you the address when you live in a city or town. 1930, Frank and Lena, tells you how old they were when they were married. Their house is worth $6,000. They have a radio too. And he's a laborer. (1940), he's a laborer. Lena dies 3 months after this census was taken, and then he died in 1968. He was 89 years old. Now, I was curious because they lived on Clement, and I know Clement is a street very near where my daughter lives. However, there's no such thing as 449 Clement. But if you do enough research, you can go back, and they changed the addresses in Milwaukee, and they tell you what it was and what it is currently. This is the house now, 2833 South Clement, which is about 3 houses down from my daughter. And this is where Augusta Schmalz, who started off on our farm, ended her days. So I thought that was quite a weird coincidence. Okay, next child, Paul, the son. He married Lizzie Hone, or Hahn, in Illinois in 1891. In 1900, they're living in Illinois. Lizzie was also born in Germany. They have 2 daughters, Ida and Anna. There's no occupation listed for him, so I don't know what that means, whether they just didn't put something down or he wasn't working, but she's a day laborer. In 1910, they've moved to Sublette, Illinois. Paul, Lizzie, the 2 daughters. They've been married for 18 years. We know that those are their only 2 children. She had 2 children, both living. He's now a farmer and rents the farm. They're vanished in 1920. I don't know where they are. In 1930, he's moved back to Wisconsin in Merrill. He's 65, Lizzie is 56. Now they have a son, Leroy, who was born in Illinois. They live at 906 Madison. Their house, which they own, is valued at $2,000. He does odd jobs. He died in 1938 at the age of 69. Here is the obituary for his wife, Lizzie, and a lovely picture. I was very fortunate to find that. Here's some more pictures. There's a picture of Paul Schmalz and his wife, Lizzie. And it really helps to have beautiful pictures when your brother-in-law is John Hills. Because what I told you we would be talking about again.
How did you follow these people from Illinois to Merrill, Wisconsin?
Census records.
Did you just look up the surname?
You just go crazy.
That would be a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And a lot of false alarms, changes in spelling. I mean, Schnellfuss, Schmalfuss, 1 S, 2 S's. It's very difficult. Then you go by other references and you see if they tie in, do things match. Sometimes it's all wrong, sometimes it's right. That's like there were how many Elizabeth Schneiders? There are how many Salms? It's hard. It's hard. But Rosa Schmalfuss, now they only have 1 S. Married John Hills, December 31st, 1891 in Sheboygan. And we know all about where they lived. In the 1900 census, John Hills, Rosa, their daughter Norma, he's a photographer, 2 children, 1 living. And it's her obituary that tells us that they had an infant named Harvey who died. Online I found these pictures that are attributed to the John Hills studio. Only one is identified as Rudolph Christ and August Borgwart. The others in the batch are probably the family. I would say this man looks like that man, but we don't know for sure. This is like a death card. He looks pretty good, but anyway, it's a death card. 2 others. Again, we don't know exactly. I think that's the same man, but I'm not sure. I don't know who this woman is, but I'd like to meet her. I think she's really cool. She's got short hair. Maybe she had something where it had to be shaved off, you know. But anyway. And again, some photos from the John Hills studio. John Hills also took public office. He was the road overseer and thistle commissioner. And that was so fascinating. Ever since time immemorial, we've had thistle commissioners here in Centerville, including my husband. He was the weed commissioner. And I didn't know it was such an honor. The road overseer seems to have made sure that there weren't cows running around. That was their job. They made sure things were good, but there was a big note in one of Kathy's marvelous documents, you had to make sure the cows weren't running wild. Anyway, so John Hills, there's his oath of office, and under him, just for curiosity, Otto Klessig and a Mr. Dossler. So all these names you see over and over again. Carl Wunsch was the town clerk. John Hills also served on the fire department, along with all these other people. And he was on the fire department for quite a while. In 1910, he is now the postmaster, and Rose is the clerk in the post office, and Norma lives with them. And it's so nice to know where they lived. We found that out last time. John Hills, Rosa, now he has no occupation in 1920. In 1930, he's the proprietor of a soft drink parlor. Rosa dies, his wife. Wife of soft drink parlor operator and former postmaster and photographer at Cleveland, died at home early this morning. She suffered a stroke of apoplexy on Tuesday. She was 62 years of age. And there's also an ad that he sells the soft drink parlor after her death. He dies in 1953, former postmaster and retired, now it's a tavern keeper. He died at his home following a lengthy illness. And their grave is also at St. Wendel's. So we did Rudolf Schmalz, who was the Northern Foundation. All that's left is a foundation. And now we do the next one. And this was Ludwig Bay. In the 1870 census, this is a mystery. There's Louise, his wife, William, his son, Louise, his daughter. Their property is valued at $100, and both children attend school. I don't know where Ludwig is because he should be here. They live right across the street from the Schneiders. So here's the Schneider Barn. This is all still standing here on Centerville Road. Across the street is this old gray barn. Most of it tumbled down, but that was where the Bay's house was. There was the barn, there was a foundation, and the most wonderful, wonderful Wolf River apple tree that made the best applesauce in the world. His barn, it had a couple stalls, it had room for machinery, room for hay, not very big, but it was still standing, part of it's still standing. She died, Louise died in 1877. She's buried in the Casa Cemetery. So in 1880, there he is with his son William, and I have no idea if he was gone, if the transcriber missed him. I have no idea why he doesn't show up in that earlier census. Now his name is spelled differently too. He's in lots of local records. He was a road overseer for District 3 and received $22.66 for that job. And at that time, his name was spelled Lewis, not Ludwig. And he was also the village treasurer in 1880 and 1881. In 1882, he sells 20 acres to Christian Knack for $1,100. And that's another very common name when you're looking at land records. He seems to have bought a lot of property around here. I believe he owned the land where our house is right now. But anyway, Ludwig goes to live with his daughter. August Hassman married Minnie Bay on June in 1883 in Outagamie County. All right. I'm assuming this is his daughter, Minnie, although she used to be called Louise. And Minnie is probably Wilhelmina. But because here now it's Lewis, because remember that's how he was listed as the road commissioner, Lewis and Louise, I have to assume that this is his daughter, and I'll tell you why. Because the 1900 census in Seymour, there's August, Minnie, Edward, and Ludwig, who is listed as the father-in-law to August. Therefore, Minnie must be his daughter. Therefore, Minnie, I think, is Louise. August is a horse salesman, and they've been married for 17 years. She has had one child who's still living. That would be Edward. They own their own farm. Ludwig's immigration date is listed as 1868. In 1905, Ludwig is still alive. He's living with them, only now August is Gustav. And now they have a little daughter, Beatrice, who's 3 months old. However, now Ludwig is listed as a brother-in-law, not a father-in-law. So again, very complicated. And Gustav, otherwise known as August, is a farmer. I tried to track Minnie, but it was impossible. Minnie led a very interesting life. And she goes to California and she comes back and she's maybe divorced and remarried, and anyway I gave up on me. William Bay, the son. As far as I can tell, he was married 3 times, and the way I know he was married 3 times is because, remember, the one census record tells you how many times were you married. What marriage is this for you now? So he first married Lizzie Shearer in Manitowoc in 1890. He had gone to work in a factory in Chicago, but came back to marry her in the Lutheran church in the town of Centerville. I don't know what happened to Lizzie. By 1903, he married again. He married Emily Sagan, or Sager, it's spelled 2 different ways, living in Appleton. I don't know what happened to her, but his last wife was Anna, and he married her in 1909. Quite an age difference between William and Anna. And this is his one and only child, as far as I can tell, little daughter Marie, who's not quite a year old, in 1910. He's a laborer doing odd jobs. They own their home at 891 Winnebago Street. He's a naturalized citizen. There he is, again, age 63, Anna 33, in Appleton, daughter Maria. They have a boarder, Augusta. I don't know who she is, if she's a relative or just some old lady that they took into their home. And he's a laborer who works on the city streets. And he died in 1922. So, this is the story of the people who lived there. Starting with Michael Schneider, who came long, long ago, through 1971, when it was the Schneider family, and then these other 2 families who also lived on that land. And our family comes in, and many of you may have wondered what those signs are and what we're up to. And if you'd like, we can talk about that next year.
Thank you. Please.
Frederick, Jacoby.
Thank you.
I have a question from the first part of your presentation. When you spoke of the fire consuming or destroying the records,
Yes.
were those records kept in the towns?
No, these were the federal records, and apparently, I passed around something that talks about it. They weren't in the vault. Somebody didn't have them in the vault, and that's why they don't know. It was a little suspicious why there was a fire.
Well, would have been in Manitowoc?
No, I think, who's got that? Somebody's got that, did I pass that around?
Townships cake.
You can get little smidgens if there's records, but this was the whole federal U.S. Census as well.
Okay.
Name, please. Go right ahead.
I'm Irene Dine.
Thank you.
I can answer your question about John Schneider. They lived in Hika. They're the first house north of the dam on the right-hand side. That's where they retired. But I don't know, it says he had a farm, but I don't know where he came from, where that farm was.
There are so many Schneiders on the plats, I don't know which John Schneider it was.
It was the brother to William and Joe and Tony. And Tony's deformity was, he was a humpback. He walked bent, really bent over. And they took their cows out when we went to school. And Joe would walk ahead and Tony would walk behind. So we'd see them twice a day, really. I guess that's all I know.
Very good, Irene. Thank you.
Maybe of interest, I'm not sure, but we use that road all the time, Frederick, Jacoby.
Thank you, Fred.
And when I was a kid, we'd go through there, and it seemed that the Schneider brothers didn't worry about the time of day when they did their farm work, and it seemed so strange. And maybe like Irene said, with that humpback, we were afraid of them. But my father had town business and things like that, and so then I'd often go with him. And I'm thinking of like on some night, we'd go down to the hardware store and then sit in the barber shop till who knows when at Reuben Prowl's, and then go home, and then he would stop and talk with them. I really was not crazy about that, but I guess I must have figured I was safe with my father. And of course he talked to them just like they were regular people, which they were. But we were afraid of them as kids. And then later when we used to go out on Saturday nights and we'd come home at the end of the dance at 12, 1 o'clock, whenever that was, the barn is all lit up. And some people around here must remember that. Well, nobody else had their barn lit up at midnight, you know. So that contributed to the idea that they were different. But I never forget how my father would laugh and joke with them just like anybody else. But as a kid, I couldn't handle it, I guess.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
I'm Willard Mathias.
Thank you.
I used to pick up milk there, like what we just said, that you can go by there at 11 o'clock at night. If I got there at 9:30 to pick up the milk, they weren't outside yet. But I would pick up the morning's milk and last night's milk. They'd never had the morning's milk done. And I said, once in a great while, you'd get to see somebody around there, but not too often, because they must have been late sleepers or something, but they didn't get too much done by day, mostly by night. And then the other thing you were mentioning about that fire, you mentioned that they had a lot of water. We didn't have water. We didn't have much water. It was trucked in because the creek was frozen, and it was so cold that night that we always had to keep a little bit of water into the pumps to keep it going. But I never froze so much as that night. And when the boy set the second fire, that was during the daytime, so it was, I wasn't at that one, I was working at that time. But it was terrible that night. I could just remember how cold it was. So, okay.
Do you remember the date at all?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Go right ahead.
Kathy Sixel, and not being from this area, I had always heard that they were real ahead in farming, that they had, you know, like tractors, the first tractors, and they had like real nice cattle and stuff. Was this true?
At first.
At first, and then over the years it...
When their folks were living.
Oh, when their folks were living, then they were way ahead, and then after a while, then there were 3 like single people living there at the end?
And one woman and a sister.
A sister and 2 men, right?
Yes.
Because that's what I had always heard.
Yes. And then George Bowman and his wife came back to live with them.
Yep. Just 1 second, Irene. Go right ahead, please.
I'm Irene Dine.
Thank
and
you.
We were talking about the 2 brothers and a sister living in the Schneider house. And also the other sister who was married to George Bowman came back, and they lived there too.
Okay.
Then, well, that's probably in the 40s.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Did you live there all the time? Till they died.
But you were saying the original parents, they were kind of at the top end of equipment and things like that, and then it sort of tapered off?
Yeah, I think they were probably some of the best farmers there.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
We want to know if anybody can identify where they are. We're guessing that where I put my pencil here, we think this is the St. Wendel steeple, and it looks like a parade. I know they used to have parades up and down that street because I seen some other old photographs with fire trucks and the VFW floating and other things. And I have no idea. I'm going to give it back to Kathy. Can you tell us where you got this from?
I don't recall.
I can't remember where they came from. They came in a whole box of stuff. Were they from you, Phyllis? No, they were not from you. I don't know, and whoever gave them to me didn't know either. But Frederick, you should know what year it is according to the automobile that's on the street.
Oh, yeah. There's a Hudson in the upper right-hand picture that I wish I had. So I'm thinking that Eddie Sure probably shined one up and put it in a parade, but I don't know. But Willard, I think, should talk about this. Because the VFW had parades with their picnics, didn't you?
1947.
This was 1947? And where was it at? Was it at St. Wendel or?
No,
Right ahead, please. Your name,
this picture,
your name,
I
please.
think this was back in 1947,
Okay,
and we started the parade in Cleveland, and then it went up to St. Wendel because we had our picnic up at Tourist Inn. It was Gretz's place.
okay.
And that year we had, you should have seen the nice floats we had in that parade. Every business place in Cleveland would put a float in. And in those days, it was really, I wish I had some pictures of that. And Wagner Yards had one of the nicest floats. And on the end of that street by Gretz's, they turned around and it took too sharp of a turn. And he tipped his nice float over into the ditch. And I mean, that was the last year that he said he was going to put a float in. So.
I know where I got the pictures from. It was from Selma Vogel, from her estate, yeah. I got them from Carla. I'm waking up, huh? So,
The first week of December in 1947, so maybe it was later.
Could have been, but I know we started, I got home in 46 and then, it could have been 48.
Okay, very good. Good.
You want to pass the picture on, you okay? Kathy?
well, I guess that's it. Any other questions?
42 people.
In one day though.
Well, you know,
This was
this
just
was not,
one
this was
day.
not a one day, this was total. And that just surprised me for the time period.
Right ahead, John.
John Wiegand.
Thank you.
Now that we're on the Civil War, that's the war you were referring to when you watched the documentary. I saw it too, it was back in September. They had so many deaths and injuries, they didn't know how to deal with it. It was really what you call the first big war the United States had, and they just couldn't handle it. And that's the one you're referring to, Civil War.
Civil War, okay.
Yep.
Anybody got anything else for the good of the order? Kathy's always got nice words.
Well, I want to thank you, Kirsten, for the wonderful presentation. You certainly did your homework, and a lot of it, too.
I think
And of course,
I think we owe her another round of applause. Thank you. Thank you.
and I want to thank everybody for coming, and I think we've completed our 12th year, or is it the 13th year? So this is our last meeting for this year, and we will see what happens. If anybody has any subjects or topics that you would like to have presented or want to present, please let me know, and Kirsten maybe will be willing to do research. Maybe I can get Bob to help me. So do some of those things, you know. Kirsten has said she will do one from next year. I also have done some research on Century Farms. And there's a Century Farm that's on the corner of X and 42. Polly Girl used to live there, a Stephan, and it was an Osei farm. Does anybody know anything about that farm? And if you do, would you please let me know if you're doing research and you come across it. I've read some real interesting things, but we haven't quite had the time yet to make sure that we've got the right location and so forth. So, and does anybody know what's happening with Sessler's? Besides that it was sold at the auction? Dr. Biestorf, have you heard anything more?
No.
Nope, just that Danny Meyer bought it, and that's all I heard too. And I heard they want to make it back into a tavern, remodel it, and make it into a tavern again, so.
From what I heard, no. Dennis.
Hold it. Your name, please?
Richard Schwartz.
Thank you.
From what I heard, it was
Danny Meyer and his son Dennis. I guess Dennis is gonna live there and maybe eventually make a tavern out of it again. But he's also, I believe, a silent Met partner in the gravel pit in Kiel.
Yep.
And that's probably some of his interest, and being his grandfather had a tavern in Spring Valley, that maybe all lending to that. But everybody in Kiel talks that not a tavern very soon.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So, well, that's about it for this year, and I thank everybody for coming. And I wondered, with the snowstorm, would we be able to have it tonight? I even called Bob. I don't know, Bob, what's happening. So, and I thank you all for your support for the whole year, and we do it next year. I hope you all join us again. So, okay, we'll have a goodbye, Charlie.
Yes. Thank everybody for coming, and we'll go around one more time, just so we know who's all here. I'm Charlie Bauer from Newton.
Okay, after that rehearsal, here we go again.
My name is Ken Smazel from Rockville.
Thank you.
Richard Schwartz, Town of Mimi.
Thank you.
Frederick, Jacoby, Manitowoc.
Great.
Rick Byersdorf, Town Mimi.
Thank you.
Cleveland.
Thank you.
Irene Dine, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Alice Messias, Cleveland.
Good.
Marie Pippert, Cleveland.
Thank you, Marie.
Paul Dominowski, St. Asians.
Thank you.
Lisa Alfson, Newton.
Good.
Marie Rosenbauer, Newton.
Thank you.
John Wiegand, Town of Centerville.
Good.
Hickman, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Hazel Wagner, Cleveland.
Thank you, Lou.
Gertie Free, Cleveland.
Good.
John Scott, Milwaukee.
Thank you for coming.
Kirsten Husband, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Kathy Sixel Newton, and again, thank you all for the whole past years, really, and have a safe trip home, everyone, and Jerry.
Thank you. I'm repeating someone else. Anyway, I also want to thank everybody for coming, and all the participation on the videos is really appreciated. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.